Is everyone awake, sleep, whatever? The carbs have hit? I have to keep it awake, that's cool. So my name's Nick, otherwise known as the Deep South Yeti. I got excommunicated to Dunedin by my company, where I work full-time from home. They actually put me in entirely other islands, because when I turn up to Wellington every once in a while, chaos, mayhem, and they're like, go home, listen up. But prior to that, to me, when I actually get let out of my cage, I go horse around the mountains and that sort of thing. Slightly hairy there. That was kind of post-trendy COVID times and slightly leaner now, maybe not. But prior to being with ZX and Bastion, I was Computer Concepts Limited, which is going through a transition right now. And I was with the Ministry of Health. Waikato wasn't my fault. I've already had this discussion. We know this. And I was at the organisation that shall not be named, but we still make eye contact and do exist in the real world. So the reason I started wanting to talk about this particular topic is, my brother lives in Queenstown. He runs a building business, and I'm like, that's cool. That's a real area in Queenstown. But one of the things I noticed when I was going to talk to him and go out to some of the job sites and some of the commercial areas of growth in Queenstown and Wanaka and other parts of Dunedin, is a lot of the buildings and the Teslas that's owned by the $1 owners of these buildings are increasingly becoming heavily integrated with technology, principally because people want to make more environmentally responsible choices about the way they build their buildings and their homes and their businesses, and they also want to do it more effectively, cost-effectively. So what do? They use technology for it. So those of you might remember when I did my medical devices talk, there's a theme here, tech will kill you, that I thought, actually, I want to look into find how this technology is actually managed. What goes into it? What's the due diligence? Where are the S-bombs? And they've got a cool band. It's actually a warrant of fitness type process that goes through it, the process. But as I looked into it, I realized, actually, some of this technology is potentially quite problematic. So we're going to have a bit of a canter through some of the things I found out about, going to chat about today. So I'll talk about some of the types of green tech that is out there, because I did this talk a couple of weeks ago at a conference in Queenstown, which was supposed to be around environmental sustainability, and I thought, are they going to stone me with like rotten apples or something like that? Because I said these things, but it really made a lot of people think about the cyber threat space and green technologies, commercial impacts, the types of compromises we're actually seeing in this space, how AI, I work with Ethan, I'm never talking to him again after that talk, and how AI is going to be used, and also remediation options to address these sorts of risks. So what is the type of technology we're seeing out there that actually is really helping make us greener and more sustainable? So we're increasingly seeing renewable energy generation in terms of how homes are built, solar, wind power, those are from Wellington, the macro wind farm here in Canada, we've got a couple of big-sized wind farms. So increasing technology is being used to make more efficient energy generation, more efficient energy choices, e-bikes, EVs, everything more or less now. It seems like every other month you've got one of the vehicle manufacturers is just bringing out a new EV version of the particularly popular model. Green manufacturing, so there's a lot more efficiencies in the way products are built, the way the sort of processes, materials that go into them, focus on food miles and in terms of, greater use of robotics. But, we're also using it to offset infrastructure deficiencies, so where certain processes are taking place in how we do use transport, electric buses, all that sort of stuff. So we're seeing a lot more role of technology to try and make us cleaner and greener, but also more efficient with what we're actually doing as well. But I guess one of the challenges also is, we've got things like 3D printing, which is great, but what can they be made for? I work in the health space, so I'm going, well, we want to build prosthetic bones and other stuff like that. But what happens if the measurements don't quite pan out? You kind of go for a hip operation, you can walk around in circles the rest of your life because the hip's not quite set the way it should be. Circular economy, smart agriculture, climate monitoring adaptation. So we're seeing a huge integration of clean, green tech into the way we do things and into our futures. But it's not all roses, because this tech can actually be really challenging to incorporate. Because a lot of these companies are startups, they're small businesses, so often the bar for adoption in this space can be quite high. So it can be quite expensive. You've got venture capitalists and seed funders going, well, we don't understand much about technology. Do we want to put money into this? What does it mean for us? So that can be challenging. Technical difficulties. Some of this technology is quite niche, so there's not a huge amount of people necessarily in New Zealand that actually understand it or how to deploy it effectively. So we're often relying on overseas parties or partners to help deploy the technology. That could be challenging. Regulatory hurdles. One of the things I often thought is, as we put this technology in place, what does it mean for occupational health and safety under the Building Act? It's interesting, I've talked to a couple of companies about how do you ensure the safety of people on your work site. The master builders, how do you ensure the quality of your product when you've got technology you don't fully understand it's integrated into your homes? And so I'm like, there's some interesting questions to consider there. As I said, it can cause challenges with the infrastructure. We heard from Peter yesterday around OT and IT. There's a huge integration of technology, more of that into this space. And the more technology we introduce, the more potential challenges we can create if we don't fully understand it and it's not appropriately managed. Market uncertainty. This market's really growing. It's also quite dynamic and turbulent, so things you can't always necessarily make strong bets about what's going to be done and how it's going to be done. There's a strong lack of awareness. Unless you are potentially like folks in this room or people who are actively in the building industry, particularly in the green kind of building industry, this is another topic that's not that well understood. It's not something that people necessarily are even aware of, but it's one of those things that has the latent ability to cause real challenges if it's not well understood or addressed properly. Weather conditions. It can cause issues with some of these technologies aren't that resilient, so they can be impacted in an environmental location. Some of these building systems, I've heard instances where they're setting up their own 5G dedicated cell towers on mountains the other side of Queenstown. And then they're having to rely on that set of condition, and in some cases, if there's atmospheric conditions that prevent signals coming in and out, because you may be using satellite and that sort of thing, that can also cause challenges as well. Space requirements, Cloud's used for a lot of things, but sometimes they do have to put racks in there, and it's not something you necessarily want to put in a boutique resort with just giant DC in there. You're going, oh, how do we manage that, cool it, and manage the power supply for it as well? So what are the types of threats that this particular niche is facing? So we're seeing an increased attack surface because in many cases, these devices or this technology are becoming just another part of these ever-growing networks. IoT has not traditionally been, but historically thought of particularly in the consumer space. But as we're now starting seeing it, it's increasingly diversifying. So what we understand to be is IoT and how it works and how it's actually, the role it plays in our lives is fundamentally changing. So that EV you were driving, which you love, that's part of that increased attack surface. Your e-bike, that's part of that enhanced attack surface. The intelligence automated thermostat in your home that potentially opens and closes louvers, opens and closes doors, the smart lock that you can unlock with your phone, all part of that enhanced attack surface. We're seeing critical infrastructure vulnerabilities. Peter spoke about it a little while ago, yesterday. But we're seeing a lot more integration of technology into these things because it's cheaper. Smart water meters, that sort of stuff. But again, not that well understood and part of a longer supply chain for which we need to kind of interrogate properly. As I sort of spoke about last year, with operational technology risks, unencrypted data transmission, because that might affect the outcome of the product. It's not designed with security in mind. Data breaches, some of these devices can be potentially the way they're configured, exposed potentially to ransomware attacks, supply chain vulnerabilities, IoT vulnerabilities. There's a lot of embedded stuff in here which we don't fully understand. And, addressing this stuff can be challenging and expensive. And obviously we'd love to be able to do it in the design phase, but it's not always the case because, as we kind of understand, some of these systems are built and deployed globally, and when you bring them into New Zealand or some of the environments in our space, it becomes very difficult to manage and maintain. So one of the more obvious examples are GBMS, which green building management systems. So that those lovely big homes you can often see around Queenstown, Wanaka, or other parts of the country. One of the reasons they can be so big like that and so energy efficient is because they're heavily integrated with technology for cooling, heating, the way in which the house, all the sensors around it there. Even in terms of the way some of the materials are built are very, very niche. So there's a degree of technology that goes into the actual manufacturing process as well. But that's just a screen grab from one of the GE building site, and that shows you just as a typical example of the types of integrated technologies that go into a modern home now. And every one of those areas has the ability to be potentially compromised in some way. So, I've got a pallet fire at home. Because I'm a nerd, I like to be the fact I can turn it on from town because, I have polar bears on my driveway in Dunedin and only get rid of them before at home, so I need time to warm the house so they can bugger off. So I will often turn on my fire when I come home, before I come home, which is about a 20-minute drive, so the house is warm. But I wouldn't want that fire turned on necessarily other certain times, and it would be kind of spooky if it was someone else turned the fire on apart from me. But yet the protocol and the technology I use is obviously no encryption involved. Password requirements are extraordinarily simplistic. The ability to upgrade it requires removable media and all sorts of funky files from slightly dodgy looking websites I've got to download. And so the whole notion, that whole security experience, because I'm one of those really high maintenance people, is really problematic. But yet it's not designed for people like me to tinker with it. It's designed for an engineer or a provider to come in and do stuff for you. I'm like, well, I don't want people touching my stuff. I want to do it myself. Which my wife hates. She's like, just stop being so difficult. I'm like, well, you married me, it's your problem. And I always say, don't blame me for your flawed decision making. You were the one who stood up there and said, yes, that was your choice, not mine. Doesn't always fly very well. I generally want to be on the other side of the room when I say that, and with a clear exit. And so one of these products often have is vulnerability entry points. A lot of the software is outdated because, again, it's not designed to necessarily, you kind of put it in and just leave it. It's not kind of designed to be actively managed and maintained. Insecure protocols, TLS 1.0 anyone, at least? If not, TLS if you're lucky. Network segmentation, what do we need that for? Authentication, what authentication? Access controls, I could turn the lock on the door, that's about it. IoT and OT, so I get sort of sideways funky looks when I talk about this stuff. It's up to say, how dare you question us? I'm going, yeah, I don't want my car to kill me. But, one of the things I heard, I don't know it's absolutely true, but I think it was last year when Tesla were updating their cars, for their software update, one half of the world's Teslas were updated globally via satellite one night, and the other half of the fleet were updated the next night. I'm going, that's cool, but is Skynet doing that? I really hope it's Elon and his mates, because if it's not, I've got problems. But, it's the ability to, in the independence and efficiency you're gaining, what are you giving up as a result of that? And what kind of assurance is in place? And what does that social contract look like to make sure that we're actually doing the things we should be doing and making sure we and ourselves and our products and technologies are safe? So what are the types of issues we can potentially see in this space? Because so much of the green economy is values-based and based on social conscience and social responsibility, there's a really strong emphasis on trust and confidence, which, funnily enough, is very much how our community works as well. But in this particular instance, some of the real value propositions of some of these businesses, these very green businesses, they run on a very thin margin for how they can often do things, because they're startups and seed-driven. So then the possibility of having a financial loss or suffering a regulatory fine, particularly, if you had an issue on a building site with construction and became an occupational health and safety issue, and you could point to a potentially cyber or digital issue that had caused it, that'd give WorkSafe a nightmare. I don't know how they're going to deal with it, but the very notion of having that kind of investigation would just kill any sort of growth and progress. Operational disruptions. And the challenge is, if this sort of thing happened, it's very unlikely these companies are necessarily going to be able to understand it effectively to better mitigate it and manage it and move on. Personally speaking, EVs, all this sort of stuff, you've got to register your products and bits and pieces like that when you get this technology in the interest of warranties and all that stuff, which is true, but I'm cynical. I'm like going, well, okay, who's that data that's been sold to and where's it going to end up? But say, there's privacy breaches and your data can potentially end up offshore where their privacy laws are different to what we have here in New Zealand. Potential safety risks. I know we laugh about the Google self-driven car, but, it's going to definitely cause some problems and kill someone eventually about what could happen there. And the thing is we often ask more of the technology in terms of its efficacy and safety than potentially it can deliver. And we're going, are we going too fast? Are we expecting too much? What does good look like? What does due diligence look like? And how do we have these conversations? So that's kind of what I've been grappling about and, what I'm keen to be talking about. Trust erosion. So I'm like, can we trust green tech? Am I
a villain and going to get flayed alive with birch branches for saying that? Or am I actually going to be something that we actually need to talk sensibly about? And this isn't just hypotheticals, I'm not trying to just make this stuff up. There are instances, within EVs, Kia had its independent security researchers discovered significant vulnerabilities within a Kia dealer's web portal, which could be exploited to gain unauthorized access to vehicle systems. So that means I can log in and all the EV6s in Dunedin I can park in my driveway. I'm sure the owners won't be too impressed, but that's what I could potentially do. And a 19-year-old in Germany was using a third-party app to hack into about 25 Teslas in more than a dozen countries. Probably because he could, but the fact is he could do it, and no one was able to stop him, and that's really problematic. We find issues with EV charging stations, cyber attacks on EV charging stations. They're able to disrupt this charging process. And anyone knows anything about EVs, if an EV catches fire, you can't put them out. They're a chemical fire. So, I was once talking to a serious crash unit cop based in Invercargill who does police around the Mackenzie Basin and around Mount Cook. And he said, this is pretty wild country out here, but, occasionally we have an EV fire. It's really problematic because we don't have any resources here to manage it, and it's a main tourist area. So how do we deal with that? And so they basically have to push them to the side of the road and let them burn. And so we've got an issue where potentially the very vehicle, the thing we're traveling in is going to catch fire because it's been remotely accessed and hacked by an anonymous party. Skynet's got a lot to answer for, I tell you. It's, that's really concerning. And again, as I say, these aren't just hypotheticals. These things can actually be happening. And I guess an example of that would be some of the recent attacks that have happened in the last sort of few years. In Germany in 2021, building automation engineering firm experienced a significant cyber attack that locked them out of their building automation system. And the attackers used the system's own digital key, to lock the company out, shut all the lighting, motion detectors, and other systems. So, if you're in a North American environment or a European environment during the dead of winter, and that sort of thing happened, that can pose real issues from an environmental safety point of view. People, freeze to death, they can't get into their houses. Or or potentially there was if there was an attacker in the house and they would, they're trying to secure themselves from that, problems as well. Excuse me. In Finland in 2016, there was a DDoS attack that took place, destroying the heating system of 2 apartment buildings, leaving the residents without heat during winter, case in point, and actually highlighted the vulnerabilities in smart building systems. And because these attacks happen outside the network, it can be done from anywhere in the world, which it's quite disconcerting to systems which you potentially don't even notice. In 2016 in Austria, hotel guests were locked out of their rooms until a ransom was paid via a ransomware attack. The attackers had compromised the hotel's electronic key system and basically locked all the rooms, which, has a direct health and safety issue, I guess, from fire escape and the like as well. And according to Kaspersky, thanks for that, Izzy, I appreciate it. Nearly half the computers in building automation systems faced cyber threats in 2022, and threats include they were able to determine the threats included malicious scripts, phishing pages, spyware, and they're often able to gain initial access to systems. And it's a lot like medical devices. Because they want to get this stuff to market, the due diligence around security testing, assurance, and secure code review and that sort of thing, it just doesn't take place because it's expensive and it potentially make the user experience challenging. And, I'm all for wanting a good user experience. We all do. But, what's the balance and at what cost? And I guess that's one of the things I'm trying to talk about here. And because, as I said, Skynet has much to answer for, AI can play a key role also in terms of actually being used as a really strong energy enabler, energy efficiency, to make DCs run smarter, cooler, use less power. And also in terms of being able to better operate some wind farms, the energy management. So again, more automation, more technology to make things more effective. So we're being greener, which is great. But again, we're all really grappling about what are the implications of AI, how it can be weaponized, what that can mean for us, and that the use cases are proliferating endlessly. So that can be really concerning as well. Environmental monitoring, as I said, leading to advanced threats, automated attacks, defense mechanisms. And because a lot of these systems are in industries which don't traditionally work in a high-tech space, high-tech builder age, or have initially a strong proliferation of security culture, this is often really overwhelming and they don't necessarily know where to start and how to manage all this sort of stuff. So, what are they going to be doing about it? And, it's like, ironically, it's a lot of the stuff we tell a lot of our clients, how do we resolve this and how do we manage it? So patching and updates, and in some cases that can be really challenging to do because the patching and update can only be done via the likes of removal media or other forms of, up close and personal activities, which can be, not always practical. Having a robust relationship with technology suppliers, really, really important. So again, the likes of SBOMs, what has gone into this product technology? What sort of assurances can you give me that it's safe? How can I manage it myself? What sort of support are you going to give me throughout its life cycle? And if there's an issue, when are you going to tell me and how are you going to help me fix it? That sort of stuff. Yeah. Security configurations, access controls, managing that, network security. So having the ability to segregate and demarcate this technology away from other more critical portions of the internet. I should say the network, but limiting internet exposure. Incident response planning, which kind of says, what's kind of weird, like, okay, if the building goes berserk, what am I going to do? But, it's a real thing we have to think about. Employee training, vulnerability management, and in particular cases, potentially enhanced monitoring, because, most hospitals you go into now, particularly some of those in private hospitals, huge amount of integrated automation. And not necessarily talking about health technologies, I'm just talking around the way in which these buildings operate. So, to better have clean air and full of, a lack of bacteria and viruses, this sort of thing has to be, there's a huge reliance on technology as well. And one of the things, I'm keen to do, because I'm all about partnerships and collaboration, or holding hands and singing Kumbaya. So, would a consumer vendor partnership centric approach be the best way forward? So for those companies that are building this technology and these products and bring them into New Zealand, how do we have a conversation? And it's hard because invariably you're not dealing with the supplier itself. You're dealing with the company that's integrating the technology into your project. So how do you work with them to empower and support them to have better conversations with their suppliers if they're willing to do it at all? Because maybe it's something they actually haven't even thought about. What does that shared expertise look like? How do we as a community bring our skills and knowledge to bear to go, hey, this is something we kind of need to think about. It's not necessarily something that's massive right now, but it's emerging and we've got a responsibility to turn our minds to it. What does an appropriate risk management process look like? You can spot the GRC in you coming out. And alignment with standards. And the EU has a lot of good standards for this sort of stuff in this place, because that's where a lot of technology is developed, and they're also catching up with the development of security standards. Proactive threat detection. So, bug bounties, proactive threat disclosure, vulnerability disclosures. Hopefully that lawyers get involved too much. So we've got the ability to manage the stuff and address it in a timely manner. Sustainable solutions. So solutions that we put in place that can be easily managed and maintained and pushed along. So we're not having to redo it all the time. And so it actually puts the ability for the end user and their local contractor to support and manage it. Doesn't have to be done by the actual energy supplier as well. So plenty of things to think about. And that's me. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much.
I am a super genius.